Good. It lets everybody know that we're recording. And let's see. Well, we're good. We're good. All right. So welcome to Co-Gnosis. And if you would, for the audience, introduce yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, my name's Anthony Francis, and I'm an artist and educator. I primarily work in photo. I teach at Texas State University in San Marcos and live and work out of my studio. And well, those aren't the same thing, actually. That sounds like they're the same thing, but I live in San Antonio. I also, my studio is in San Antonio as well. So yeah, I make a lot of portrait work, but I'm always interested in kind of the philosophy of the work that I make, which is largely portraiture and what that entails. So I'm always interested in that, interested in art and a lot of other stuff. But I think that's my short spiel.
Cool. And as part of the process of Co-Gnosis, Grandmaster Flash would often talk about his influences and who he's battling and that kind of stuff. So as a beginning point, would you mind sharing who are some of the influences? I'm not going to ask you the stupid question of who's your favorite, because if you're an artist, you don't have one, but you might have a grandmaster that you look to. Who would that be?
Man, you are like, it's so crazy. I can't not respond to the coincidence of you saying that, because we were just having this conversation about me doing this little gig this weekend, and I photographed Melly Mel and Scorpio from so it's funny you said Grandmaster Flash. So it was like so I was thinking about that. So but anyway, I love that. I love that question, actually. Influences. I could talk to people about their influences and my influences all day. That's kind of a difficult question though too. But I would say, if I had to think photographically, like in the contemporary moment, I think I think a lot about Dan Winters, who is a photographer and who is still active and working. And the reason I bring him up is because, when you start studying people, you get to see their influences as well. So there's this really long chain that ends up happening in their lives. And so he, but what I liked about his work when I was in grad school is that he is able to create a certain emotional tone that resonates with me. And I think more than anything, not only that, but his work is beautifully photographed and lighted, but at the same time, like, that is something that I appreciate about his work. So he was like one of the first people that I saw, like, wow, like that light is on point, and at the same time it creates this emotion that is captivating. And so that those two things are always going to be important in portraiture. The other one would be Roy de Carava, who was a photographer out of 1950s Harlem, and his work was about people in Harlem, for the most part, that space. So it was mostly Black people, and it was mostly having to do with not just their personal lives, but also the social landscape that surrounded the 1950s and Black people. So there was civil rights there. But he too, again, that intersection of narrative and technique, I find to be, beautiful in all, I think, all art forms, when you're able to do that. And so he started out as a drafts person. So you can kind of see his ability to compose and put things together within his compositions, within his photographs. And then this was really going to be first, but Bell Hooks, who was, I would say, a writer, an academic, a Black feminist theorist. Her work really influenced how I would approach people in general, but definitely as I functioned through art, as my practice went through. Um, and I find that to be really interesting because then she kind of led me to other philosophers, like philosophers out of the, I always want to say new school, the Frankfurt School of Philosophy. So Eric Fromm, and other philosophers. So I spend time with philosophy in general, but I always thought that that thread that went through her work, and the writings of Eric Fromm and M. Scott Peck, who is another person that Eric Fromm was also associated with. And so, but their work specifically on love is what has impacted me most about my work, because it brings me out of my work. It brings me out of this idea of making a product, and more so has me focused on what are you doing with the people with whom you work? And that becomes really important. So it's not just, oh, this person is a subject with which I will make work, but it's more about like, this person is a person, we're going to have a good time, and some work will come from that. And I find that that work, especially when you look at portrait artists, a lot of times the interactions that they have outside of the frame of what it is that you see is vital. So it taught me my route. My journey has taught me a lot about life and how life just happens to kind of be replicated in some ways in art. So those are a few people.
Cool. Yeah, I also hear some Baldwin when you talk about love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, because I would say he's a central author about the idea of love in the face of what you could arguably say was a lack of love shown. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, that's amazing. So we've covered who you are, your background, and discussed a little bit of your medium. How do you express those things in your work as it stands now? You know, like, what are you doing with that?
You mean you mean outside of art, or you mean kind of what am I influenced by? How do I take those elements, and then how do I make art with those elements?
Let's follow the second idea, but just to where my mind was at, the context of my intention was specifically, how are you making money with the things that you have learned, and how does that express itself in your work?
Yeah.
In other words, you know, if, for instance, let me, you're teaching at San Marcos, right? And you're teaching, I would assume, photography, maybe some kind of other art, basic composition courses. I don't know. And then you're probably making money on commissions or sales. You know, just talk a little bit about the sources of universal remuneration for the effort you've put in to get where you are.
Yeah. Wow. It's crazy to be even making any money, honestly. Like, I mean, honestly, because I mean, we spend so much time talking about like the 1%, the 2% at the top of our fields, that a lot of times like we lose kind of like, what is the day-to-day hustle? And so a lot of us are doing a lot of things. I mean, even the people at the top are doing a lot of things. It's just how much money you make doing a lot of things. You know what I mean? Like that can be different. Like, say for instance, and it's so funny too, because I've always chosen the poorest route. Like, honestly, like as far as money, like I always choose the thing that's gonna make me the least amount of money.
Right.
You know, I've liked poetry. You don't make money for poetry. Like, those are the poorest writers out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, unless you're doing something else. And, you know, so in undergrad, I was an English major. So I was a poet. So then I went to go teach English and teach high school English. So I did that. And then I went to go get my MFA. Yeah. So anyway, so I did a lot of schooling too. So, so I teach, and that gives me a big bulk. And one of the beautiful things I think about teaching, one is, if I'm understanding you, I'll of course respond based off of what I think you're asking me, but also what I think is important. So one of the things that I think is important is that I've taught since I got out of college. And so, because I thought that was what I wanted to do, because I felt like a good job, a steady job is definitely the safest thing to do. But because, like, my family was poor, that was also, the good job was also seen as having good money, right? And so, it's a good job. It's a thankless job in some ways, and that's what makes it tough. I mean, even on a collegiate level, it's a thankless job. It's really tough, institutionally. But I guess there's some knowing the right people that refer me. I taught at other schools, smaller schools. I taught high school English, as I said. So I've always had a history of teaching. So I think teaching really, like, my teaching record allows me to get teaching jobs. And so that is one of the things. But also, like, as I got my MFA, I hung around other institutions as well. So smaller kind of continuing education student programs. Like out here, there's a Southwest School of Art. And so I taught there, and I taught, what usually was like older adults, but I taught darkroom. All of the things that I learned, I taught, and I still teach. And so I taught, like, one class here, one class there. And then I got a call from the department of, the art department, the photo department at Texas State. And honestly, a lot of those jobs, if they're not tenure track, they're really kind of like, hey, can you teach a class? It's really low stakes for them, and low risk. So it's really not a big deal for them to just reach out to me and say, hey, like, you want to teach a class? But I don't know if I worked my way up or if it was like a war of attrition and I'm just still there. I think to some degree that's what it is. But at the same time, it does allow me to make about the same amount of money off of my classes as I did when I was teaching high school English. So what that does, though, is that, one, I think I'm pretty good. I've always been if you're familiar with sports, I've always been a player's coach. You know what I mean? Like, so students always like me, but that's largely because I try to break hierarchies as much as possible. You know what I mean? Like, I believe in equity. I believe in, I also don't believe that students are empty vessels, right? So they come with things, you meet them where they are. And all of this understanding also comes from training, right? Like, I have a master's in education, in educational leadership. So working with just adults, young adults and kids is like really within what it is that I do. Not to mention portraiture is more human interaction. So it's just this understanding. So there are some things that are really artistic, are artistically driven kind of skills, I guess, from making art and interacting with people where there is overlap, right? Like, because I make portraits and I'm working with people, then my ability to communicate, emotional intelligence, those things come up in everything that I do. And the biggest thing that I wanted to do was have alignment in my life, honestly. So when I got this job, I was like, I was like, hopefully I can get to a point where I make enough money to where I can do other things. And I always wanted my art practice to allow me to have some freedom. So, so I can make what I want, like, right? Like, I can make what I hope to make without somebody being like, hey, you need to make this work that's going to get you a show, right? I mean, of course, like, sometimes that if you apply for a show and you get turned down, then there is a moment of reflection where you're like, well, shit, should I change how I'm doing this thing? So there's always this kind of this extrinsic type of battle that you have, right? From people seeing your work and then, like, you being affected by what you think people think about your work. That's happened to me recently. But so I also make work for exhibition, and largely if you work for institutions, that's what they like you to do anyways. And there are some equivalents because I also do editorial work. So editorial work right now, I'm working on an assignment for a magazine, and that's usually the way that I work. Over the last year, I've also started to do video, which a lot of people might not necessarily know because they think that like still photography and video are different things, right? But like, you know, Trinity, those things are seen as photography, right?
Mhm.
So I've started to make videos. I had a big job, or at least my biggest job, actually, funny enough, the biggest grossing job that I've had has been in video. And that was my first video job this past year. We made a video for Black Diamond, like climbing gear or whatever, which was really funny because I do not climb, like if there's any type of, you know, so it was just one of those things where I knew somebody or whatever. And I think that that's really important too. Whenever somebody starts looking at me and being like, yo, you did such, I'm always indebted to somebody else that's like giving me some type of connection or whatever to somebody else. So, and somebody else believes in me. And so I think that that's one of the things that for all of us to kind of keep in mind. So anyway, so shows, exhibitions this December. So there was that big video. So editorial work, commercial work. This December, a museum, McNay Museum, acquired 3 of my works. And so, you know, there's money that comes from that. You also get honorariums sometimes if you're in it, and if you give a talk or something, then they'll pay you for that. And then I almost feel like I'm missing something, but I think that's it. Editorial work. So there's work outside of the academy, but at the same time, the larger amount of money that I make comes from the institution at which I work. So Texas State. But that's really hard work. I mean, honestly, like I think that that's hard and continual work. And the other tricky thing is that things don't stop, right? So like if I'm working, like right now it's the summer, so I can take editorial jobs and not worry about my class load, but I will take jobs, and I don't know if I get in trouble for saying this publicly, but I will take jobs when I'm teaching, and I will cancel class to work on a job. And the reason I'll do that is because I always say that like my students benefit from my understanding of the industry. And so if I am not taking work, if I'm not actively working, then they're just working with somebody that's talking about like yesterday's or last month's or last year's or last decade's understanding of the industry, right? Which I think is a grand disservice to us most of the time anyways, because we're sending students out with really no practice of or no understanding of the industry. And it's not so much that's going to change the industry, but if students know, hey, like there may not even be an industry as far as you know it by the time you leave here. Like they need to understand that like very early on, even, you know what I mean? Like don't expect to make a lot of money, or maybe this is a subset of skills that you could use, but maybe you need to go work on some other skills. You know, maybe be an art director, maybe be a creative director, rather than solely looking at yourself as a photographer. I mean, even as I've worked, have started to kind of open my mind to think like, wow, like I could actually do some other things, or I could do some, like right now, you know, I am a cinematographer, but I can also think about like directing now because of like the things that I've done. And so it just expands. And that's kind of what you need to do. And that's really what happens to all of us. We all grow. And that's why, like, as you get older, they try to get rid of you because you have so much. It's not because you don't have skill, honestly.
Yeah.
And I think about that, right? It's because you have too much skill. Like you have too much skill and you've built so much understanding that I think a lot of times they don't want to pay you for what it's worth, so they can go get somebody young and full of energy and say, okay, well, this person is going to do all of our running around and we can pay them a nominal fee as far as we're concerned, because they could be making millions. And it's still like, I think that's one of the things I think about the industry. Like if people can afford to pay people millions and they would rather pay them the millions as long as it's far less than whatever their bottom line is. And so, I'm not gonna get on my soapbox, or not that much, but it's just one of those things I've been thinking about, especially since I've like crossed over the other side of 40 now. It's like,
it's funny when
it's
the age that happens, right? You're looking around and you're like, man, I got to get smarter about this thing. I got to get smarter about that thing. And then all of a sudden you look up and you're like, damn, I'm already really smart. What am I still thinking I have to learn?
Exactly. I mean, you always can, especially because things continue to change.
Oh yeah.
But even in negotiations, I mean, I've learned so much about negotiations by mistakes that I've made. But then you realize, wow, there's so much money out there that people have and don't want to spend. I made a mistake on this job. Just for instance, I just think it's important to explain the certain things as I learn it. The client told me that a job was going to take place in my town. And so I talked to the person that I'm supposed to be photographing, and they say, no, actually, you know what? We are based 97 miles outside of your town. And then the editor was like, nowhere to kind of talk to, right? And so I was like,
right.
And it wasn't a problem. Like either way, like I'm just really chill. And I always kind of try to, I'm really optimistic, in some ways. Like I wouldn't say I'm optimistic, actually. I think that's not, it's like, I think the worst sometimes, but I'm like, I think I can deal with the worst. So that's what it is.
Right.
I feel confident. I'm confident. That's what it is. But yeah, but I was worried because I was like, you know what? Like I hired an assistant, and mileage, of course, right now, especially the price of gas. And so I was like, well, so on the back end, I had to be like, hey, like I hired an assistant and I did this stuff. Like, can you all pay for that? And they say yes, luckily. But I learned, like, slow down, don't touch that bag yet. Like, let's talk about what's in that bag first, and so I'm just learning about that. And I learned about, I always kind of give way to my day rate too. And so I should really adhere to that. Like, sometimes I don't know. I'm learning, and I'm not too old to learn is another thing that I'm learning. So, yeah, but yeah, anyway, I'm long-winded, that, Trinity, but I'm,
well, I'm not here to curtail you. I'm just,
yeah.
Yeah, gummit. I'm going to run into a limit of free Zoom because I don't have the paid for version. And
okay. Well,
here's what we're going to do. We're going to continue to talk for the next 7 minutes and 45 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll do a new one.
Okay.
And I'll edit these together because I plan on editing the show. All right. Enough show information. Now,
cool.
The main topic I reached out to you is what are the ethics of purchasing art and displaying it? Because there are times where you're purchasing art and you're finding something beautiful. Street photography is a prime example of this, where you're purchasing the image of someone who does not receive the direct benefit of you appreciating probably their tragedy, right? Yeah. So what is your perspective on the ethics of owning someone's image from a snapshot in time?
This is an interesting thing. I'll say, one, I do think it is largely ethical under certain circumstances, right? Like, I think that I'm not a street photographer, so that's one thing. Right?
That's an example. You make art with people that can. Your artwork is not street artwork. I mean, your personal work. You may shoot that style at times, but it applies to you because you work with, in general, groups that would be considered not in the majority,
Mhm.
and probably have some history behind them. You know
Mhm.
what I'm saying? So the question still applies to even your work.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's important. I'll cite Cynthia Freeland. She wrote a book. She's a professor of philosophy in at U of H. And she wrote a book called Portraits and Persons, that I always look to about thinking about like the politics of portraiture. And one of them is that, you know, she lays out a few tenets, but largely she just believes that people should understand the exchange, right? Like before we even take a photograph of someone, they should understand the exchange. They should know how to present themselves, for one. So I'm not trying to catch them in a way to where they don't want to be seen. And then at the same time, like they should have a presence of mind to understand even what that exchange is. So not only do they understand the exchange, the realization that there is an exchange, but they understand how to present themselves for the photograph. And also they understand what you know what I'm saying and what I'm trying to get at. From a monetary standpoint, you know, there is an exchange. I will say that, and I don't want to. It's so funny because a friend of mine told me to be very careful about this, and I am trying to figure out how to be careful and at the same time be relatively fair. One is I do believe that it is a likeness. It is not that person. It's not enslavement, right? We are not selling a person, but at the
Right.
same time, likeness is really important. So, and the reason it's important to say likeness is because the camera creates a copy of an image. And so, so it is like, it's more akin to a drawing than it is to enslavement. You will, you know what I mean?
Right.
That's exactly, yeah. So, so that's really important.
Apologize.
You,
I am definitely paying attention, but I'm also trying to purchase Zoom. So, all right, done. I think it works.
oh, no, yeah. Okay, cool.
Cool.
Do we have more time or should we? Oh,
We
yeah,
have
you did.
unlimited minutes now.
Okay.
Right,
Awesome.
look at that. Capitalism is working for me today, in spite of it working against me every other day.
Yeah, no, for sure. But but I did want to kind of just explain that, like, I do think that there are different types of exchanges. And so like when my work, when the images that I sold to the museum were acquired, I did pay the people that sat for those. Now I won't necessarily do that after the one time that it sold, but at the same time, I did think that that was really important to do that, right? That money in some ways is understood as being the larger exchange that we make, right? Unless you want to get into like how we have, you know, transactional relationships, right? But largely money is something that you exchange. So it's not necessarily an exchange of, it's using money as a gesture, right? To show appreciation. It's not buying somebody's time. So if somebody came up to me and was like, hey, I saw that you were you know, paying everybody to sit for you. Well, that's more of a gesture, and everybody doesn't get that gesture because also the demand is not necessarily there. I won't make the same amount of money on my editorial photographs as I will for selling my artwork.
Right.
And so that's really important to understand that. And then as far, I appreciate the fact that you brought up the idea of people of, I know like it's really hard for some people to understand kind of how it is. I mean, in terms of how, you know, people of color kind of respond to themselves in terms of like, you know, naming and stuff like that. Because we did say minority, and we used to say minority, and we say, you know, what is the other word, like marginalized,
Right.
And then, you know, some people are now saying people of the global majority because there are more brown people than there are white people. But at the same time, if we're specifically speaking of in the United States, of course, that's not true. So in the United States, we are, there are more white people than there are Black people. So, but yeah,
But
I
there's not
appreciate you
more
kinda
white
asking
people
that.
than brown people in the even
Yeah,
in the United States, I would
I'm
argue.
of an age and you're of an age too, where like that transition happened while we've been alive,
Right.
like to where brown people have outnumbered white people. So I don't exactly know where we are on that. I just felt I read it a few years ago and they were like, we're about to get to this point. It's like Y2K. What are we gonna
The
do?
utopia has
So
occurred.
I don't exactly know when that happened. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because even Y2K was one of those things like where there was a lot of paranoia, and then you're like, okay, we're cool, we're fine. Turns out
I like
everything's
the way
still
you
working.
describe
So
that statement as a concern of paranoia and making reference to the idea of more brown people than white people. I think that's a
yeah.
solid
Well,
juxtaposition.
yeah, for sure. But I mean, with what your show is about, I think it's really interesting to think about like, facts and like what happens in philosophy, because really what we're doing is we're getting to a point where we understand that like as times change, and that's also an old adage too, right? As times change, they stay the same. I mean, I
Mm,
think that the power structures are always going to be in place. And so as we kind of think that it was just like with Obama, right? Like Obama became president, and people thought that the world would totally shift. Black people, white people too, just thought like, oh shit, like this is about to be a huge difference, and it wasn't. It wasn't a huge
I have
difference.
it.
I mean,
I
and
have
some people would argue that depending on where you go ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just I have a beautiful
No,
story that kind of
no.
illustrates your point for that. I was at a
Mm-hmm.
small church, and it was intentionally multiracial, right? Or multi. At the
Mm-hmm.
time, we called ourselves multi-ethnic.
Yeah.
The terms of how you appropriately refer to the other change, but the
Yeah.
intention was to bring folks together of one faith but different skin tones,
Yeah. Yeah.
and maybe even philosophical backgrounds. Folks from the
Yeah.
Black church, folks from the
Mm-hmm.
white church, folks from the Catholic church. You know what I mean? We were
Yeah.
intentionally inclusive. So
Yeah.
we had a coffee shop, and this coffee shop was owned by the whitest of white people from up north, Norwegian.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
like they live in a town where they didn't know Black people, but they've intentionally
Mm-hmm.
pushed themselves out there. And he was good friends with a very
Yeah.
conservative Black man who was a electrician, right? And the day Obama got elected,
Yeah.
he kicked in the front door of the coffee shop and walked in and says, "All right, all you white people, get the fuck out, because this is now my shit." And
What?
right, but the
What?
point he was making was
Was
not
he joking?
no, that's what he did. The day that he came in.
Oh, okay. Wow.
But there was a dialogue that had happened between the shop owner, who he was just renting a space from our church, and created a coffee shop there. And this gentleman that had been coming in and out of his coffee shop in the morning before he would go do a job that was very technical during the day, right? But he was making a statement of the expectation of folks he knew about what it would mean for Obama. And he was also setting the expectation of the fears that white people may have had because of the election of Obama. And personally, I've always thought that we have not elected a Black president yet, because he was raised by white people in a white context with a white mother. And not that changes anything, but the fact that we pick his skin tone over how he was raised,
his ethnicity.
you know what I mean, is always been confusing to me. I often argue, because forgive me, I'm riffing now on politics, but it's germane.
No. Yeah.
But I often argue with my friends that believe in more of a white perspective, that, you know, we still haven't elected or we haven't only elected a Black man president, we elected a Black man in the white context that had to struggle hard to make himself acceptable to the Black community, if you read his book. But
and I've, you know,
go ahead.
Yeah, I've read, you know, I agree. I would probably disagree that he wasn't Black, but I think that your point, or even the way that you stated, and even the anecdote is relevant in a sense that I think we have to understand that we spent so much time putting so much stock into kind of like what, like you said, again, like even your church, the way that they had, you know, how it moves from like race to ethnicity. I mean, in a lot of places in the world, like how you look to some degree, right? Like you have to be careful, because even white people, right? Like when you think about like, you know, Ireland versus like Great Britain versus France versus Russia, right? You could say that these are different ethnic groups, even though like, you know, even though they have a similar skin tone. So race and ethnicity aren't necessarily all inclusive, I guess. Like they aren't mutually inclusive in terms of like, so the same is true with Obama. Many of the things that we say as Black people that really think about Blackness, that really think about how things change, is that one of the things in thinking about equity, right, is understanding that anybody can be an asshole, right? And or anybody can be anything in some ways, right? So it's like, so when we say like Obama, when we talk about Obama, like it's important that we do explain that, like, that I think ethnically he was a lot of things, right? I mean, that's part of what it was, right? Because his dad, if I'm not mistaken, was Kenyan, I think, and then I may be wrong on that. And then his mother was from Kansas, right? Like that was a thing to illustrate her whiteness, right? To say Kansas, you know,
well,
which I find funny because my mother.
She was an anthropologist and never afraid
to. So.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I keep forgetting about the lag, and
No.
it's hard to have a conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was an anthropologist.
No, it's totally fine. But yeah, so I think I would say that he was Black, but I'm just saying he's wide. He's many things, right? Like he's a different Black person than I am. He's a different person than I am, right? But people would say similar things depending on who you are, like what is real Blackness? And we have to be real careful because that's full of, you know, that's full of stereotypes, right? You know, so I mean, even within the Black community, but yeah, so I do think it's really interesting. I wanted to kind of go back, and I don't want, I know we were talking about, I forget how we got into this, but anyway, I'll let you write the ship though.
Yeah. The way we got into this part of the discussion, and the reason why I shared that story, was because we were trying to come with the appropriate language to discuss.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Like how do we define these things? Is the intention of value, or is the definition of value, or is it the fruit that's of more value? Is kind of where I would take it. Those are the three choices I'm gonna lay before you and say, you know, is it the context of the words? Is it the words, or is it the outcome of that exchange?
Yeah, I think space, right? I think space and time is nonlinear, and what I mean by that is like, right, when we talk about race, when we talk about all of these things, we're talking about things that have happened to create race, actually, right? Like to create race here. But then also like the things that have happened within the context of race. So say, for instance, when we talk about like racial injustice, when we talk about things that have happened because people are Black, or people are certain genders, or people are certain, or have a certain overall demographic, including class, right? Like, I mean, that's one of the things that we run into that we're running in today, right? Like, I mean, that's really always haunted us, right? Because we don't always think about the fact that like the founding fathers were rich people. We never like, what does that mean to have a country that's founded by rich people? Like, I mean, like, you know, that's why we talk about like this place perhaps being an oligarchy more than it is either a meritocracy or a democracy, because people that don't necessarily have a lot of money have also been highly politicized and drove into certain perspectives. And I think that that's really, and that's also dovetailed with race. So it's really important for us to understand that. But as far as I know, we were talking about the intersection between like the ethics of photography, I mean, and using one's likeness. I don't think that I do think that having certain experiences make me more hyper aware of certain things. But because I'm a Black person, I think that anybody that I work with is going to be affected by my understanding of history and how that does that affects race, but it also just affects humanity, right? Like we don't want to repeat the problems that we've seen based off of whoever somebody is, right? So where you've been discriminated against because you're poor, because you have bad credit, because, you know, in those things, that's opportunity for us to say, well, you know what, because this happened, then I'm gonna make sure that everybody's taken care of, right? I'm gonna be a better person because this person was discriminated against for any one thing, right? And I think that that is what makes me more sensitive. It's almost as if like, I think about this too, and I know, you know, again, I use that because we're both photographers, but it's like, if I make a huge mistake on a job, it teaches me so much more than if I'm just trying to remember everything, right? Like for some reason, if I forget my memory card, if I forget a battery, if I forget my tripod, like it teaches me something in a way to where it's not as effective. It's almost like, unfortunately, like pain functions that way too, right? When we're most hurt, either we can run into that with anger, which we see that a lot too in our society, and we really just hide acting in anger. But very rarely do we run into the people that are like, okay, well, you know what, I'm gonna learn something from this moment, or I'm gonna make sure that somebody doesn't necessarily feel the way that I feel. Those things are really valuable. So as far as photography, I just try to make sure that the exchange is as fair as it can be. And also, yes, likeness. In using people's likeness, I want people to feel comfortable with how they're seen. There have been times where I've tried to convince people, people have taught me certain things. Like I've taken photographs and people say, you know what, like if that's what you want to go for, then go for it, you know, in terms of like how they look, which I'm fortunate to work with people. I work with artists a lot of times too. And so a lot of times they understand that it's not necessarily about how good you look, right? But it's more about like the emotional impact of the work, right? And so, so I take those things very seriously. And sometimes I'm at a loss. Sometimes I don't necessarily know what to do. But I do try to make sure to think about these things. I'll give one example quickly before I kind of give it back to you. And one of the examples is I thought that one measure of showing my thanks was to give somebody the same image that I put on museum walls. Those are pretty large ass images, 42 by 52 or something like that, right? And then my friend explained that may not be exactly what to do, because who the hell has enough room to put a 42 by 52 inch wall print on their wall, much less get it framed? So it was really important. Yes, exactly, right? So I just rethought that. So like the plan to open an edition of smaller prints, but still, you know, substantial, to give to people then, and they can do what they want with them. But there's still like ongoing negotiations. Sometimes so I still try to figure that out. But yeah, so money was definitely one of them though. Like I just thought that, you know, we having, time being money and things like that. And at times, like, people, reject that. Sometimes people don't necessarily want money, or they don't want that. And that's why, in a way, we're always kind of indebted to one another anyways. Always we are, in love and in life, we're always accruing debt, is what a scholar, Fred Moten, says, about our interactions. You're trying to repay somebody for gas money and they won't let you, right? Like, that's kind of the love exchange that happens in some way. Because like a friend of mine said in an exchange we had recently, he was like, I'm not a transactional person. And in some ways, we do have exchange in the sense that we are holding a tally, right? We're not keeping a tally on each other, And so I like to kind of think about, the nature of these relationships that we hold dear.
Yeah, the idea of building debt over our life to those that we interact with, or the reverse of the ledger, not necessarily debt, but accruing gifts, right?
Word.
Yeah, because debt implies that I owe something. A gift implies that I have received something. And the definition of that gift or debt is based on the context of the relationship. I would say, if I don't pay people for doing my artistic portraits of them, but I will give $20 to a street person if I take a photo of them, right?
Yeah.
Because at least I'm not going to solve their problem, but $20 means far less to me than it might be to them.
Yeah.
Where they can either purchase the drug they need to make their life bearable, or they can purchase food if they choose to do it. Like, I don't care what they do with whatever I give them.
Yeah.
The idea is I'm respecting the fact that I have captured something of them. But I could also look at myself as a witness to their pain and their situation, their existence, right? Like, I could go out into the streets and realize that I am not mining people's tragedy for my art. I am instead standing witness and sharing who they are and the fact that they exist out there. There's, and depending on, that's great for me to have that internal dialogue, but if I don't have the conversation of consent with someone, then that is a different kind of relationship. That is that's another thing. But I guess there's a lot of images that I delete, and do they need to get paid for the deleted ones? If I throw away that document,
I think it's fair.
I have sat for you on a project that, I don't know if it's dead ended or if it is someday going to be resurrected. I'm not sure the answer. I'm not asking, really. I'm just saying that the point of the exchange, and you and I understand the context of that exchange. You know what you were thinking about it. I know what I was thinking about it. But I have an understanding of your process, and I think I maybe would have possibly influenced the next time you did that because of my reactions to things. And so the only debt that I detected from that exchange is I wanted to have a sample of that, right? I wanted to have that point to stake my claim and say, I sat for this, and I wanted to.
Have I given you a copy?
Yeah, you did. I've shared it.
Okay.
You gave me a digital copy. I don't have a print, but I don't think you're selling my face on the inside of some museum wall. So I don't. I'm not worried about it.
It's so funny that you brought it up, because I had a studio visit, and I've got 2 of the prints from that series. It isn't a photograph of you, but it's 2 of the other 2 other people, and I think 6 people sat for that series. And so I haven't done anything with it, but I did realize, at first I was like, it's discontinued, but it's funny because it was like 6 images, I think, maybe even a few more. But I was like, well, I guess that's a body of work, but I didn't know how I felt about the body of work in general, which people respond well to it, but I just didn't know how I felt about the series. And so it's really funny to that you brought that up, because I was just talking about that series the other day. And I do think that the image with you is a rather striking image. And maybe because people are touching, like you touch in that image, and I think that there's a response to it. To
and we were
being in there.
strangers. We were absolute strangers.
That's true. Yeah.
Like, you didn't know me.
Which I always find to be interesting, because you've always been that type of person. You're kind of, outgoing, and you understand, like, in terms of talking about the exchange, like, you kind of, when you understand art, I think it's we take for granted how foreign it is to most people. Like, honestly, we do.
Yeah. Well, how do you trust someone to represent you, right? Most people are afraid of it because they either don't like themselves, or they don't know what your and to me, this doesn't matter what your politics are. Things that I don't care about. If people see, I can walk around the street, people can look at me and they can make a choice about me that has nothing to do with me, right? So I understand that, because I have been in the process of capturing something that I was looking for the light on the surface and the shadows in the absence of the light. I wasn't looking at the whole person, right? I was looking at their shape, their silhouette, their je ne sais quoi, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I had to throw French in there so I sounded worldly and knowledgeable.
Yeah.
See, so like that's the way I can approach that. But I have approached many people, and I'm like, this is the thing I want to do, and I think you are the right person to help me represent it. And they go, nah, man, no.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, we don't talk enough about that, especially as, like, when you're trying to make work, like, how I was actually just thinking about that this morning, because I'm, like I said earlier, I'm working on a new project, and I understand that the first thing that you do when you make work is you fail. I mean, that's just exactly what it is. And so, but how you fail, people don't necessarily know how that works in photo. But like something like that, like, you have to have the resilience for people to be like, no, several times, like, or even like, not just no, but like, hell no, like, or what's wrong with you, I mean, which is a different type of no, so,
exactly.
Yeah, so for sure.
I mean, I want to go a slightly different direction, because I think we've discussed a little bit about your process, and we've discussed the ethics of owning art, which I would agree with you, right? I would agree that, but I, as a consumer, need to be aware of the ethics of my consumption of that, right? Like, if I have a bunch of photos of strangers to me that are in that, none of them look like my context, what is that about? What
That's
is,
fair.
what is that about? Am I trying to own something of someone in a figurative sense? Like, could I take it to that place? The intentionality behind my purchase, on the outside of it, I'm paying minorities to capture minorities, therefore I'm supporting the thing that they're doing, right? That's what could be read from my purchasing of that work. And by more minority, I just mean not an empowered group. Okay. So as you've suggested to me, hill people in the white context is no different than, a lot of context, taking pictures of pygmies. And forgive me if that name pygmy is incorrect, but I'm using the exotification idea.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I think you bring a,
go ahead.
not to cut you off, I'm sorry,
No,
but I
please
was just,
respond. I threw something
yeah,
out there.
no,
I need a
I mean,
response.
so what I would say is, I would back out of even thinking about, like, we think about a referent, right? I mean, and we talk about this within within like photographic theory, is that like that a photograph is like a drawing in some sense, but you also have this drawing of the thing about photography. And I will say this is changing. Like the theory has changed um, already. We're talking about photography in a way that probably does not exist, because things don't necessarily need to be to exist anymore to be photographed. You know, I mean, like we really kind of moved past that. You know, with CGI and three-dimensional illustration. So there's in some way what it is that you think you see may not have had an actual in real life existence, you know, which I think is really interesting, because the way that the way that we then start to imagine things is really interesting, because now we have the ability to make something seem real that was never real and
Right.
is not real, you know, which is a beautiful thing if you're interested in thinking about space and time. But my but I guess what my point is, though, is that if there is a referent, and I think that this is what we're talking about, we're assuming that there is a referent. So if there is a photograph of somebody from New Guinea, right, then that suggests that the photographer went to New Guinea in order to make that photograph.
Right.
The thing that happens is that by purchasing or by engaging in the replication of those photographs, what I would say is that we in some way are supporting the perspective that created the photograph. So I think that, to your point, is, say for instance, there's Barclay L. Hendricks, who's a Black portrait painter that made paintings of Black people in the 1960s, late 60s, 70s, that were just looking cool as hell. Now there's a historical significance and lineage to why people dress the way that they did, but his work of them is in adoration of them, right? So if you had that photograph, I mean, if you had those paintings on your wall, then what I would look at, even as a Black person, I would say, oh, so you dig Barclay L. Hendricks and you dig how he looks at those people, right? And that is what I think is more my reading of people buying photographs. So say, for instance, if we were to look at like something that we would see as immoral, right? Like say, for instance, somebody purchasing child pornography. I would think that you are a child molester, right? Like, so if you engage in the purchase of racist imagery, then I would think that that is in line with how you view people. I would think that you were racist. So I think that in some ways, like having an understanding of what a photograph is and what is its message, like any other art, right, is understanding what it is that you endorse, which again dovetails and could also span and branch out into, you know, our politics. What are your politics like outside of governmental politics? But what are your ideas? What are your morals? And I think having that alignment and having an awareness of the physical alignment that we suggest is important. So I hope that that makes sense.
It does. And I just want to play with this idea a little bit, because I feel that we have to challenge our thinking. We have to challenge the expectation once we make a definitive statement that that we then need to come back and test it by making the alternate statement, right?
Yeah,
you know, it's
for
like
sure.
you got to interrogate the devil, as
Yeah.
I say.
Word. The devil within, even.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny that these ideas have been coming to me lately about, well, I'm digressing, but I want to, let's put a pin in the idea of interrogating the devil, and I want to come back to it about it. So can you own artwork and present artwork in a way that is, because we say that once the artist has made the thing, the audience is telling, they now lose control over the definition of that work, right? So if I can, for instance, I use this example all the time. There's an artist that took a photo of a crucifix and a vat of urine.
Yeah.
But if you don't know how he created it, and you don't know what he was trying to say, if you divorce the image of the intent, you now can look at it and read a beauty to the way that it's lit, the artifact of light, the meaning of the crucifix itself. And then when you accept all those things, it might cause an idea of offense if you also know that the yellow substrate that he's photographing through is urine, and that the meaning behind that crucifix has a different meaning than the context that he's using it, right? Yeah. But I could purchase that and hang that on my wall right next to my white Jesus and my Ethiopian Jesus as a depiction of Christ. So which one of those is the correct interpretation of that art?
Yeah.
Because I could also be owning pictures of Jesus because I am suggesting that I own the idea of God, but all I own is a set of images, right? You know what I mean? Like there's the layers to our reality, the layers to our metaphor, right? You have the concrete, you have what we think of as the non-physical, and then you have the superstructure that is beneath all of these things, that may or may not have meaning to it, but we ascribe it. So how would you, in the context particularly of child porn, what is child pornography? Is it a nude child, or is it a nude child that is innocently shaping themselves in the context that an adult understands, but they just see they're moving their body, right? Is that child pornography, or is that art, or is that just observation?
You bring up a good point. I think that's especially in that place, right? Because then there was oh my goodness, I forget what her name was, photographer. Anyway, there was a photographer that would make photographs of her children, and the children would, they would swim and they would go, they were in Virginia, I believe it was. And so they'd be in the countryside and they'd be hanging out, and they would, she would take photographs of them when they didn't have clothes on after they swam and things like that. Now, some of it, in some ways, some of it, if I were to look at it as art, right? And it was meant to be art, to be clear. It bothered, it definitely bothered some people. This was a big argument. I hate that I forgot her name, but I'm just at that age. But
you know too much to require.
Yeah, so that no, but she continued to photograph her kids, and but that particular body of work was really problematic because of their age and the fact that they were indeed nude, and in some cases they were also interacting with adults, while at the same time not being clothed. Now, some of this is cultural, right? Like I think the reading of it is cultural either way, right? Cultural based off of kind of where you were, where you were raised. Some of us grew up kind of, outside, like playing in that type of environment where you didn't have clothes on, or you swam nude or whatever. So some of us came from that. Some of us also have an art background. So we were like, okay, well, that's art, maybe art that I don't support, but it still seems to have the intent for being art. I can see the playfulness in it. I can see children In one point, one of the kids was smoking a cigarette or something like that.
Right.
And so it was like this clash of like being an adult, but also being young. So you can see the youthful, you can read it. Now, whether or not you should subject children to that, right? And like what you said, the replication of these images, like can then go beyond whatever the artist's intent was, right? That's fair too. Um, so if you buy it, I think we still have to think about what your intents are, right? So I think that there's always a conversation to be had in trying to prove something. I mean, we see this in the legal system too. Like, how do you prove someone's state of mind? How do you prove, which is in the sense, what is the concept? What is the intent? You could apply art questions to that, right? What is the concept? What were you trying to do? That's the exact difference between manslaughter and murder, right? Like there's an accident where somebody dies is not murder, right?
But you may have
whereas
culpability.
other times it is. Exactly, right? So you're responsible for it. Same thing I think is like an example that has to do with photographs that happened here was there was a Dairy Queen, right? That had a picture of a lynching on their wall. Now, the picture of the lynching was not, it was a picture of a lynching, but it was also a movie set. So the question then was, were they attracted to the movie? Did they not know? All of these things. So again, you're talking about culpability. But then at the same time, like there's a lack of oversight at the very least, right? Or was it intentional is another question. So
could they have been putting it
my
up
point
as,
is
to make a point that this exists, and just because you don't see the image or the effect of this, it doesn't deny the fact that this exists. Now, understanding of the production of it is another question too.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the interesting thing is whether or not, to go back to my point of my assertion was, does that mean that whomever was in charge of putting that up, does that mean that they're racist? Well, again, like if I were to go into somebody's house and they have that up, it would definitely be at the very least a conversation piece. So I think that, so I mean, my point is that I think that there's always a question to be had. I many times am not a person that is going to kind of like completely jump to conclusion, right? Like, so say for instance, there are people in this world that would see that and rip it down, right? There's still questions to be had. I mean, especially when you think about the fact that like artists, whether you're talking about female artists, whether you're talking about, Black artists, where you're talking about people that are on certain sides of a historical conflict, they kind of replicate, right, or use imagery that in a sense is can cause harm, can cause pain, but at the same time they are willing to kind of that pain in order to have a conversation about the causes of that pain. And so I think that we should all, we should look at things, but then at the same time, like I sometimes, like when people act certain ways, like in rash decisions, I don't always, it's not that I don't hold it against them, but I understand that I have feelings, but I'm able to deal with my feelings. So it doesn't mean that I don't have those feelings.
Right.
So I could say, oh, well, you should learn how to have a conversation that's more civil. But all of these things, though, to some degree are kind of funny because there's times where like, we're like, oh, well, that's a time where you need to act. And then this is a time where you need to have a conversation. And many times the people that say that you should be civil are the people that are in power at that moment. Right. And so I think that
uncomfortable.
That's right. Exactly. So it's like, oh, well, you fucked up my shit. So like, you need to be cool because like everybody else here is chilling. And so I think we just need to be, I'm not gonna say we just need to be aware because that is a simplification of something that is highly I won't say it's as complex, because sometimes these things are very simple. Like, so say for instance, when we talk about like the golden rule, you should treat people, how you want to be treated. Or I know that there's a progression of that, right? When I was younger, we would say, treat somebody how you want to be treated. My parents were pastors, but then there's also like, treat people how they want to be treated. And I think that that's even more fantastic. That's even more right on the money, right? Like, you treat somebody how, that's the same way with our relationships. Like, I've treated my partner how to love me, and my partner has treated me how to love them. And we've agreed to engage in love on each other's terms. So I think that the same thing, and sometimes the problem is that we think that treating people how we treat the people that are closest to us the same way is out of the realm of possibility. And I don't think that that is. I think you go into with the assumption that I'm going to treat people well, and then and make huge adjustments at times. Sometimes it may come from like being engaging in our own disequilibrium, being uncomfortable, rethinking. Just like I said, I made an assertion and I was like, okay, well, this person that's engaging this is like reinforcing, racism in some ways. But at the same time, the presence of racist iconography or racist symbolism doesn't necessarily mean that a person is racist. Say, for instance, if I'm giving a talk, right, and I have to use that in order to make a point, some people say, okay, well, you're racist. It's like, no, that's not how, that's not exactly how it is. So the presence of something that is harmful doesn't mean that that person is necessarily out to
Intending
make
the
people
harm.
feel badly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But sometimes we do have to go through pain in order to have an understanding. Understand that even as a person that's been Black, I wasn't born understanding history.
Right.
So like sometimes we think that things that involve us are just out there to hurt other people, which is a failure for people to step outside of themselves. Because I had to endure pain to understand what history was myself, right? Like, I didn't understand enslavement. I didn't understand, American history. I didn't even understand, if you could imagine, like, say for instance, if you go back in time, right? And say for instance, Martin Luther King, and you're looking at Martin Luther King and you're like, you don't know that he's been assassinated, but you're just looking at, I'm just looking at all the things he's done. And I'm like, oh, this is great. He did a lot of good things for everybody, actually, right? Like, I mean,
Right.
that's another important thing to kind of look at what he was saying when he was actually killed. Which was more along the lines of like, economic equity throughout the United States, which really pissed some people off that didn't piss him off when he was talking about him having a dream. And
Right.
so my point is that like learning about that, if I was a young kid and didn't know he had been killed, then that is not only, that's me being uplifted and then at the same time being hurt and pain stricken by the fact that I didn't know that. So history, understanding history, education in its own right is literally a reorganization of how your brain works, is when you absorb new information. So, right. The presence of something that causes pain is just like working out. We got that whole flip it saying of no pain, no gain. But in some ways, there is some truth to that, but then there are all these other conversations about what is pain, who is enduring pain, who has to inflict pain, that brings more nuance to our conversation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I believe in a restorationism, that you can be rehabilitated no matter where you start or what you do. There is a opportunity for you to rehabilitate yourself, maybe not in others, but to yourself, right? I know for a fact that I have been racist in my life, but my intention was always one of love. So then how do I take those opportunities when they're pointed out as racist, or when I come to understand them as race-based ideals? How do I redeem myself from that? How do I need to redeem myself? Do I have ownership of it? Because when I participated in it, I wasn't aware that that's what I was participating in. But there's some culpability, because my benefits that I live with in everyday life are also possibly derived from that that school, right? You know, like,
Yeah.
I don't want to digress too far, right?
Yeah.
But I would agree with you that the pain of making remuneration for wrongs, intended or otherwise, is a valuable tool. And then once you arrive at that state of rehabilitation to yourself, the pain of being identified with the old you, you know, with the unredeemed you, becomes acute as well. You know, like recovering addicts, abusive parents, you know, and you know, they may not have realized what they were doing was abusive, or maybe they had full knowledge of the pain they were causing, but they thought that discipline had to have a pain component to it, right, for it to make an impression, you know. These things at the time would have been considered good parenting, but maybe now we would consider them horrible abuses. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I guess long story short, the context of the action has to be taken into account when judging the action. Is something that I've been coming to, but then if you cannot require stasis if you're going to whatever redeem, you know, and when I'm
I like that point.
That's just something I've been working on my whole life, right? You know, but when I was younger, I thought that for instance, we had a private exchange between two people who knew each other. You made a statement about blackness and the annoyance of the grouping of POC and talking around the issue. And then I said, so do I refer, you know, asking for a friend, but do I refer to Black people as Black people now? You know, because, you know, you have a right to define yourself as you see fit, and I have to respect that context. But also, we seem to run away from things that stink real hard, except instead of just appreciating what stinks. You know, I'm not referring to the identity of self as Black, but maybe the ideas, the stereotypes, the negatives that get put attached to that, and denial of all the beautiful things that are attached to American Blackness. Because I would say American Blackness is different than African Blackness, or because African whiteness is definitely different than American whiteness. You know, because I had a white young student of mine that came and learned from me, and he was white, but he was born and raised in South Africa, right? So he was an African American by the strictest definition. He was an African, he was a South African American, right? You know, and then you got to start delineating deeper and deeper to people that you know, immediately qualify because of some intrinsic nature of theirs, right? So I'm like, have you ever applied for African American scholarships? Because you could actually claim that, right? And once he was talking about how he had had Black employees, servants, whatever the definition of that. He grew up in a wealthy context, not a surprise, being African. And he referred to, I had an African American nanny. And I stopped. I said, she was African American, meaning she lived in the US, flew to Africa, got a job for white people in Africa, and that's African American? And he goes, oh, well, I just meant she was Black. You know what I'm saying? Like, so these ideas are like snakes eating themselves. You know, we try and come up with convenient shorthands. We don't have to deal with the lineage of things You know, it's like,
Well, I think it's also about whether or not it's valuable,
uh,
right? Like certain terms are valuable. So say for instance, like Black people will explain kind of ethnicity in a way to where a lot of times um, white people don't necessarily have to, right? Like, so if I see a lot of people saying like white, but I will say that America is just a totally different beast. Kind of we use white and Black to be filled with so many presuppositions and so many assumptions that the rest of the world does not. Like the rest of the world is more so based off of like sometimes because of where people come from, it does suggest certain things more strongly associated with ethnicity than it does in America. Like in America, like if I say I'm Black, that means a whole bunch of assumptions. You know what I mean? Like people start thinking things about demographic, about all of these things, my education, and so those things are really important. My politics, so when you say a Black conservative person, that's almost unheard of in America. Whereas there are a lot, let's just put it like that.
uh-huh.
And some black people that don't even know they're conservative because of the assumptions that come along with being Black. You know what I mean? So I think it's interesting. I will say, as far as South Africa, of course, if there's any place in Africa that understands, I mean, Africa understands colonialism, and that is race based, but even that too can be along ethnic lines at times in a way that is not in America. That's why it was different for me. I actually visited South Africa, and it was very different being in South Africa as a Black person, because it was the first moment where being Black didn't have anything to do with my ethnicity. See, I mean, and so a lot of people don't necessarily understand the delineation between race and ethnicity in this country, because both of those things, as if you go into South Africa, where there are 11 different tribes, 11 different provinces in what is it? To say South Africa, I'm thinking about
Zulu,
Johannesburg,
Indian.
right?
Right,
So
right,
in Johannesburg, you get so there are Black people that are speaking different languages,
right.
which is not something that we usually see here. We might say, okay, well, you might be Latino, or something like that, but it doesn't mean vastly that it's vastly different within the United States. So it's just really interesting to think about that. But I also just think that overall, like the point that you were making about stasis, I thought was valuable, because again, this is a power thing, right? Like anybody in power does not like to be inconvenienced,
Mm.
right? And so, say for instance, if there's a poor person that has to walk to the store every day to get their food, right, or to get any food, if a person has to, and they don't even have to be poor. Say for instance, your car breaks down and you have to walk to the store to get some food. Well, the person that drives is always going to be like, man, I would love for something like that to never happen in my life. And they don't understand the struggle of that person all of a sudden. And so the same thing happens when we talk about terminology and what people want to be called and how people identify. Because we are like, okay, well, I would just really like to occupy the space in which I do, right? So cisgender white males of some level of affluence, though that person. And the funny thing I find about like creating that delineation is that so many of us do not occupy that space, white people included, right?
Mm.
Like there are white people in the sense that are poor in this country, right? And they are unheard as far as we're concerned, and always also have been in some ways weaponized, right? Because some people are like, okay, well, who's taking your jobs? And I'm like, but who's letting them take their jobs, or who's hiring the people to take those jobs, right? And those
Yeah.
questions aren't necessarily be talked about, right?
Right.
And so I just think that, we have to get used to this type of change. And also that I think that that's a positive thing. I think that as people change and as we're looking for, I was thinking about like, we're all at this point used to the term or most of us are used to the term safe space, right?
Right.
The thing about safe space that I think it's a fallacy, right? And the reason that I say safe space, I understand the point of it, but I could argue that a place should not be seen as safe, because we know that to be false. Because someone can go in there and there be no supporter of what it is that they're exactly thinking about. But what I can say is that there are places that can become safe, that are ever becoming safer. And what I mean by that is we should create spaces where that space can change in order to accommodate all people. So that's what I'm saying, is that, like, I don't think any place has ever been there. And we see that anybody that looks at history understands, like, even people that, say, for instance, people in the LGBTQIA community could say, you run into a lot of rifts within the community, right? Because I don't want to speak without representation, but as I talk to some friends, right? Like, I have friends that are gay that have a problem with the idea of being trans, right? And so, because they didn't have to think about it, it wasn't even a conversation at some point in time. And it doesn't mean that people don't exist. It just means that they were not represented in thought in any significant way. So I just think it's really important that we hope to evolve, we hope to change. And I, for one, as I age, I always look at people that are not learning or not willing to learn. And I think at some point in time, people actually think that they retire from learning, which is fascinating to me, because I really do think that people are like, oh, I've worked so hard in my life, I just want to chill. I don't want to do anything. And I remember somebody telling me that it is unnatural not to grow, right? And I think that's something that we should continue to understand, is that to grow, to learn, to develop is to be alive. And so we just always want that this equilibrium that comes with not understanding something or having to be to still learn something. And so I think that that's really important, as we think about, like, to your point, the idea of stasis, right? We don't want to be static. We don't want to be in that position, because that means that we're not accommodating people, but we're also not learning, we're not loving. Because as we know, in partnerships, even in partnerships of 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 60 years, we're still learning each other. Or there are things that I may never know about my partner, that I should be happy about. I should be happy that I don't know certain things in some sense, because that means that person can hold on to their individuality.
Right.
And they can always choose to be in this relationship with me. And I think that that's a positive thing, but we want to know everything, right? In some way, which is a competition, is a race to die, that I'm not interested in.
Yeah, amen to that. I think when you lose the opportunity to learn, you can choose to take it or not. But when you lose the opportunity to learn, that changes a state of your existence that's unrecoverable.
Mm-hmm. Word.
You know.
Word. So I know it can be tiring for people. I mean, I live with my mother. My mother lives with us right now, and I see it in her. You know, she's a little older than us. Obviously, she's my mom, but yeah, some things she gets exhausted by. She's like, oh man, all of this shit has changed. Like, how do you keep up? You know, how do you keep up with all of these things? And it's just, you want to,
Right.
I mean, maybe your priorities are better. Some things you don't have to keep up with, but anything that you care about, you're going to have to maintain,
Right. Yeah, I would say, everybody likes to divide themselves into sets, right? You've got the human set, and then you have the subset of humans that we all can divide ourselves. I would say me and you are probably in a similar set. I mean, you're actually more educated than I am, on paper.
Formally, yeah. I was about to say on paper, yeah, for sure.
I've the farthest I went is a BFA. My wife has a PhD, but you have a master's degree, right? But as a scale, I would say economically, and because of the nature of, I mean, your wife's a doctor too, right? So the two of us are married to doctors, right? Yours is more MD and
Mhm.
mine's doctorate of learning, right?
Yeah.
But we're still married to doctors. We're both men
Yeah.
in our 40s.
Yeah.
We have children.
Mhm.
We're artists. We've had to make
Mhm.
money both on regular and side projects. We have I would say, a Southern understanding of our context just because of where we maybe were
Oh yeah.
children, right? And we have fathers
Yeah.
that are of their time, would probably, you know what I mean?
That's a great way to put it.
So by the set, even though if me and you were standing next to each other, they would say those are people that don't belong together. But I would say we are actually the definition of a similar group, you know?
Yeah, for
Now,
sure.
we have a lot of differentiations. There's a lot of very obvious ones to anyone that's watching the video,
Yeah.
contextual experience, right?
Yeah.
But in a way, if you took away the visual, I mean, I guess you could tell from your dictation and my dictation, but we're the same, even though we're not, right? We are very
Yeah.
different individuals.
Yeah.
Your contexts have framed the way you have absorbed the same, I would say, social strata that I occupy. We're probably similar-ish in financial places. You know, I look at
Yeah. Yeah.
you have a very beautiful finished room that you're doing this interview in. I have an unfinished shed that I'm standing in, right? You know,
Mhm.
but long story short, we can find affinities and we can find differences that that fit the wants and needs and desires of the moment, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
that's the basis of our relationship, I would say. That is how we
Yeah,
are able to enter into dialogue.
for sure. For sure. I would add that, like, one of the things that I've learned over the last year, I take these courses at a place called Night Bar School. And it's kind of a like continuing education, but at the same time, it's usually kind of college type courses or whatever. And one of the things in one of the classes that I was reading, and again, I forget what the philosopher's name was, but basically, and this is at this point, it's kind of a conversation about an approach to life, a way of looking at things that's been absorbed by other theorists too. So I don't want to attribute it to this one particular person, but the theory of difference I find to be a lot more helpful than like us looking for similarities, because it's obvious that we have similarities, right? And I think that if we just assume that we're all different from the very beginning, then we can really start to talk about like who we are, because it just plays a weird game on us. Like when we say, okay, well, look, this thing is different. Let's start with its differences. Because like you said, like if you start with sameness, if you assume everybody's the same, then difference, we have an adverse reaction to difference, right? But if that means that the people that look like me are different from me, right? And then we don't get into this problem where it's like, oh shit, I thought we were like, I thought you were black, I was black, and that meant, or you were male and I was male, and that meant whatever. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. And so I think that like starting off with that, I don't think we would end up at the same place, but even if we did, or we would end up at a similar place, this understanding that things are different and things are the same. If we start with difference though, I think that it changes the connotation of some of our sameness as well. Because sameness is seen as good, right? And then anything outside of that is a threat to whatever sameness is, which suggests, again, this hierarchy, which is how we kind of got ourselves into this problem in the first place, right?
Right. Sameness is the birth
Yeah.
of tribalism.
Yeah, yeah. And that's exactly, Yeah. So that's the same reason why some people don't know how to act when we say black, right? Like, or even Mexican, right? Mexican is so full of negative connotation in this country because of immigration that a connotation that might have had a negative connotation that saying Canadian does not have, which explains why it has what it had, like where it explains, and it at least highlights its derivation, right? Like its origin. So yeah, so that's why, like, for Black people, even some Black people don't even like to say black, because of the negative connotation that's come with it. So
Yeah,
so
I don't
yeah, a
like saying
connotation
white because I don't want to be identified as the oppressor, right? Because but to run away from my whiteness is to ignore the context that people see me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely not necessarily fair to, I mean, even when you run into people, like I've talked to a lot of white people that have talked about kind of like their lineage, right? So some people can say, okay, well, I was Polish, or, oh, my family's Polish or from Poland or Ireland, et cetera. And I find that I think that that's a lot more freeing for them too, right? Because, there's like this thing that I hear white people say in this country where it's like, oh, I'm white, I don't have culture. And it's just like, what does that mean, bro? That's not true at all. Like, not only that, but like at the very least, if you're an American, you have culture that you can't even realize a lot of times until you go somewhere else. And then you need to ask yourself, why is it that they know that you're American besides your accent? Like, what comes with it? Like,
right?
Like, why is it that they know that you're American? Like, you need to ask yourself that question. Like, I mean, myself included, I'm sure that I function like an American. Like, our proximity is large. We take up a lot of space, the way that we speak, the way that we communicate in some ways is way more direct than other people do. Our sense of time, is a lot different than other people. So, all of these things that we don't even realize is American culture, that goes beyond or is housed within race is really important too. And some of those things go back farther than we even think. Some people that are white and Irish, right, like, don't understand some of the connections that have probably gone on in their family for generations, and don't even understand, like, why is that? But you get to Ireland and you're like, oh wow, why do I do certain things that these people do? And the same thing for Black people too. There are a lot of things that, like, that some Black people don't know, and of course white people don't know, is a cultural thing that permeates space and time, that goes all the way back. Because even though some of us, our lineage has been cut off by enslavement and not necessarily having a paper trail, there are certain oral traditions and things that are in our culture, and in our families that is the same as things that we see in Africa. So I think that those things are really important. I think heritage is important. It's important to understand the people from which you come, and and I think that paints a better picture of what humanity is in some ways. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. One of the things I've been, that was a shock to me when I moved from the South to the North, right? Because I've lived all over. Was the definition of whiteness in New Jersey was not the same definition of whiteness that was in South Carolina, and the definition of whiteness out in Texas is yet again different. Because there are Mexican or people of Hispanic descent that have been living in Texas longer than I would say the folks that came afterwards that made the state. They existed there when it was agnostic, and they see themselves as white. That's why you choose. Are you white? Yes. Are you Hispanic and white? Right. So the definition of whiteness or blackness, I think, changes based on a lot of factors. And I once had an argument with an Egyptian pastor of mine. He lives here in America, so he's not really Egyptian. He's an American, right? But he's of a liberal, the liberal school of Christianity. And, you know, he was being really hard on the idea of whiteness. And I said, you know, the problem with whiteness is it's like the nothing from the never ending story. It just consumes everything. So nothing is different. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I think of as whiteness. Only because my experience is we're colorblind. That's how you be a good person. You include more in your group, so therefore your group becomes inclusive.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And maybe that's white. In the liberal mindset, that's white supremacy culture.
Yeah.
Right. And in the what I would call the progressive mindset back in the day was that this is the way you achieve parity in relationship, by ignoring the difference instead of celebrating the difference. But then I also remember growing up with super friends, and there had to be an Indian superhero, there had to be a black superhero, there had to be alien superheroes with different colored skins. So the idea,
but it was the same story too.
Yes, it was the same story, same context, same idea,
just a different body.
Yep. They, you know, all had the same origin story, right? Well, no, there's probably a select reduced number. Either you were special when you were born, you became special because of an outside of event, but no matter what, you were special in amongst the group that you would be classified in. That's why I think it's funny that the difference between Martian Manhunter and Superman as an exploration of those identities of alienship. Right? But we're digressing. I think I didn't. I actually did not want to get into a discussion of race because I feel that is.
Just edit it out and it'll be like 5 minutes of the show.
Yeah, I know. See, that's the problem, right? The context that we describe art is built in the idea of identity, and the only way you have identity is if you talk about the context of that identity. You know, but
I'm always down to, we can always have another conversation about any of this stuff. I'm always down.
Yeah, well, I would say that looking at the time and judging by the amount of fun and energy that we're having at this point, that this is that we are at the end of this conversation, and I want to say thank you so much for all those years ago walking into my house, a stranger, and taking that photo, and then years later allowing me to take a photo out in front of your house of you, and having this dialogue. I think I find it valuable. I've learned some stuff. I've had some things confirmed for myself, and
for sure.
To say love is love, and I am expressing my love for the gifts you have given me, and am thanking you for the debt you carry for me.
Yeah, likewise. I appreciate it, and anytime too. I think you'll be at this a while. So if you ever got a slow, you ever have a slow day, slow week where you're trying to schedule somebody, just put me in, and we could revisit some of these things, or have a conversation about art or any other things that we have that either overlap or that we could learn from each other. So
well,
just
if
let
I
me
was
know.
going to say,
Let me know.
I was going to ask you one last question before we ended the show.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I have a series of 3 questions that I plan on asking everybody, but this one question is, what is a thing that you hold true now that you don't suspect might change with more time?
I think just my own conviction of love, because I've had it. I think I've had it since a very early time, and I think it's just relevant to think about like philosophy and how it might help. It might kind of work within the context of your show, which is, when I was 6 years old and my parents were ministers, and I don't know if I've ever just really been a good Christian. Let's put it like that.
Mm.
And because when I was 6 years old, I remember asking myself, what if there's a person that doesn't know Christ, that does everything right? Like, do they go to hell? You know, and I didn't really understand where that question came from, or where like, how do you get so much conviction about about a set of ideas, you know, because I wasn't trying to be devil's advocate. I was just trying to ask a genuine question, you know, like that didn't seem fair to me,
Right.
that a person that had all the things that we say good people would do would go to hell for not knowing Christ, so to speak,
Right.
or not being saved. And so I think the only thing that I've ever found that could replace um, or even hold any type of conviction has been love. And love, as I understand it, as something that's conscious, um, something that we willingly engage in, um, and something that something that we can walk in, right? Like, because usually love is delineated to some type of like emotion that we have, and it's fickle, and it's we can be enraptured in it, so we don't know about it. Um, and so I just find that like trying to be convicted about love is probably something that I'm going to continue to carry with me, because everything that is good in the world kind of comes from that. Like love for myself can be explained through the expression of creativity, right? Like I can just, everything is there. Like having a loving relationship with myself, having a loving relationship with the earth, having a loving relationship with people, um, is all supported in doing good things with and for those things that I have affectionate for. So like my whole entire art, like, you know, I mean, my life hinging upon art and family is only aligned through that, you know, only aligned through that. So I think love is something that's going to be steadfast for me. And stepping out of it, I'm still going to have those convictions. I'm still going to feel short when I'm not acting like that, not acting in love, not thinking in love, not thinking compassionately. I think that that's the only thing that really holds me down. Now, again, just like a lot of other people's belief systems, I'm not I'm not perfect. I'm not good at doing that all the time, but I think it is something that endures and also stands up to scrutiny, which is also really important for me.
Amen. Amen. And then the second question that I always ask is, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it, so I'm just going to say it dumbly and allow it to evolve over time.
Yeah.
How do you vote? Not
How do I
like
vote?
physically how, but like, do you vote by
Like along what
party, or do
line?
you vote by issue? Do you vote by person? And if
To
you,
be fair, I don't know if I keep up as well as I should. Like I definitely don't read a lot on politics. Like I read on things that are overarching, you know, politics, like philosophy and humanities and things like that. I think that that places me in more of a liberal mindset, because I do believe in sharing resources. I do believe in, I won't even say equity is a part of that, but equity is put on a ticket a lot of times as issues that politicians have. I'm also in favor of, and you can hear it from what I talk, I believe in the pain of understanding history, and that dovetails with, you know, the teaching of critical race theory, which I do have to be fair, critical race theory is not being taught in schools. That is an academic concept that that many people don't breach at all. To be fair, if people are listening to this with an open mind, so I don't believe in teaching critical race theory because it is not on the docket. That is not what it is. But it's talking about history and what has happened throughout history. And I think that there's value in that. The same way that it was value in me actually learning about, you know, about enslavement. For me, I continue to learn about the history of the world and the history of Africa, the history of places like Brazil. And so those are things that I know. So I do. So I think I do lean liberal. But I will also say that, like, I believe that our system in politics is very flawed. And so I think that if I were to say liberal is not fair necessarily to me, it's just something that when I talk about it, I say, but if you would ask me, if I subscribe to a party, I would say no. I don't think any one party is adequate enough for any human that is really thinking about things. I don't think it is. I don't think the Democratic Party is. I mean, especially if you look at their history, like, how could you kind of just vote blindly with the Democrats? How could you vote blindly with the Republicans? So I don't think that. So I would say I have more liberal ideals socially, but it's funny because while I don't always vote with the fiscal interest in mind, but I think that, like, having a way to spend responsibly is also important, which is what Republicans always sit on. And I don't think that anybody with any sense is not gonna agree with that, right? It's just the fact that we are split. And so you usually have to vote against your best interest either way,
Right. Yeah. At some point, you're limited by the choices presented, and you have to make. When you're limited by the choices you're presented, it means you make limited choices.
Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah. So I felt like, yeah. I mean, I guess I'll leave that there. But yeah, I mean, but again, I don't read up on every politician. A lot of times I do the legislative history of Democrats, the legislative history of Republicans, and a lot of times it overlaps if anybody's paying attention. Like, what happens behind the scenes is different from what happens a lot of times, on Front Street.
Right. All right. And the last thing, and this is a one-word answer, you have to give me your immediate response.
Mm-hmm.
Fruit or process?
Oh boy. This is provocative, and I think you did that just to be provocative. So, but that's fair. I dig it. I would probably have to say process. My mind says process. My heart says fruit. But yeah, I would say process.
Okay, excellent. There's no wrong answer to the question. I'm intending to get to the heart of what people, I find that, and I'm defining my this after you've answered, so don't change your answer, because it's
I won't. I think everything is like a process and like a dedication to the moment, right? So in some ways, you got to kind of commit to the moment. So I just for your own understanding, I think asking that question makes somebody interpret what it is that you're asking, right? Which is subjective. So that is what I base it off of, is my interpretation of those two words at the time, which will change.
Yeah. And the reason I bring it up is because I have become more focused on the fruit and less focused on the process, because I can reverse engineer, or possibly reverse engineer from the fruit to the tree that grew it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I can't necessarily tell what fruit the tree will provide until I see the fruit. That's
oh boy, I would have to disagree with that.
See, that's okay. We'll save that for your return.
Well, because my belief is that the process, like the process is the fruit.
Oh.
Yeah. So like that's my thought. My thought. I mean, that's how I make art and everything. Like, I understand that, like, when I'm looking at that, I'm looking at the process. When I look at the fruit, when I look at what I'm seeing, it is the process. And I also feel like work that's not done like that is formative, which means that it's meant to look a certain way by defying the process. So say for instance, lust versus love, right? I can make lust look a certain way, but it is only through the process of caring is love seen for what it is.
And on that note, I'm going to end our show. And thank you so much. And please follow Anthony Francis on Instagram. Go ahead and give out your, how do I find your work?
Anthony C. Francis. Website is afrancisart.com. But if you go to my Instagram, actually, you can find all of that. You know, that's kind of how we try to make things work these days. So, yeah, Anthony C. Francis, all one word, Francis with an I. And hopefully we'll see some new people, new faces is always good.
Amen, brother. All right, stay safe. I'm gonna